Okay, I'm pretty excited about today's webinar as we have an amazing expert, 𝗪𝗶𝗹𝗀𝘀𝘀𝘀. He's a certified Scrum trainer and an accredited Kanban trainer. He's also a member of the Scrum Alliance Board of Directors from 2015 to 2017. He's an Agile expert and trainer, been working with Agile since mid-2000s, speaker in events and conferences around the globe, and founder of K21, 𝗪𝗶𝗹𝗹 and Adapt Masters. And now, without a further ado, I will hand it over to Rafael. Over to you, Rafael.
Thank you very much, Ritika. Really nice to be here. So let me share my screen. All right, just give me 1 second. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so I'm bringing here a few core topics I'll be talking about. I mean, it's not going to be sequentially, right? They will be embedded in the presentation, but the idea is to share a few stories and well, across those stories, a few patterns that I've identified that are related to the product owner work and agile product development, and especially a part of it, which is incremental development, right? Which is a core part of agile. So leverage the 80-20, the Pareto rule for high value prioritization, reduce risk with small, safe steps of value, turn uncertainty into product excellence, and also overcome a few common PO challenges. So starting with a first story, imagine a company that is operating in a highly regulated market, right? And because of that, this company goes through frequent audits and has strict compliance requirements. And at the same time, this company relies on a bunch of software procedures that need to be aligned with those regulatory standards. But all of a sudden, there is a major regulatory shift because of a pressing industry crisis, and they have to urgently update.
Rafael?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but we have a few comments from the audience that they're not able to hear you properly. If you could just...
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me see what's happening here. Because sometimes Zoom does that to me. After after using Teams or Meet, the competence that it turns down my volume, right? So I'll roll back a little bit. So imagine a company operating in a highly regulated market, right, with frequent audits, strict compliance requirements, relying on a bunch of software procedures that need to be aligned with those standards, right? And then there is a sudden shift where a lot of regulations are changed by the proper agency because of an industry crisis, and they have to update the whole set of procedures that they have up to a tight deadline. If they don't, right, they may suffer from severe penalties like fines, the loss of licenses, something that can really impact their business. So the big question here is, how should we prioritize this work? Theoretical insight before we go into the scenarios, right? What happened? So first of all, you may be aware of the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, right? That's used in the day-to-day life, like everywhere. But this rule is key to great product ownership. So what is interesting about the 80-20 or Pareto for us? Well, my interpretation of that is that value in a problem that we want to solve is not evenly distributed. Value concentrates in some parts, or most of the value, right? So most of what we do has little effect, but a small part or small portions of it will bring most of the value. So if we adapt our Pareto rule a little bit, I could say that the value expected to emerge from offering solutions to a problem is unevenly distributed. So our role as product owners is to find those parts of most of the value is concentrated, right? What are the parts of the problem that we should address next, first, and then next, right? To bring most of the value upfront, right? So what is the next most important part, or the most important part of the most important part of the most important part? But for us to be able to do that, we need to understand or to align around what value is, what value means for us, right? So we gotta get to a definition of value, an aligned definition of value, to work as our driver of prioritization. So we will prioritize according to that. So maybe we could define something as Pareto prioritization, right? Which would be, well, effectively taking action on the next most impactful small effort, or the next most impactful or valuable part of the problem that we want to solve. And I'm talking about problems generically, right? It could be a goal, it could be a need, it could be like a product vision, for example, with different granularities. So back to our case, right? Remember, the company operating in a highly regulated market, sudden changes, have to adapt a lot of things, tight deadline. How should we prioritize that? So I have two different scenarios here. First one, well, they created a detailed sequential plan of everything that needs to be done, everything that needs to be updated, right? Yeah, maybe they did some prioritization on what are, you know, what they consider the most important procedures. Let's do those first, right? But big things to be updated. And as what usually happens in long plans, there were delays from overlooked complexities, from strictly following the plan. And when they reached the deadline, well, not everything was done, but whatever was done was out of priority, right? So what happens is critical updates were missing. And that led them to severe penalties, and it impacted long-term the company. The false assumptions here are that all work is equally important. So we just do all the tasks that we have to do, right? And then we are sunk in a sea of tasks to complete that needs to converge to a particular date, right? And the other is that detailed planning guarantees success. Oh, we've looked into it, we've planned it all, we have it all attached, so it's gotta be successful. That's not how it works. So the second scenario, well, they face the reality, and it is the reality, right? That, well, most probably not all updates would be done by the deadline. Well, if they can be done, perfect, fine, right? But there is a high probability that it's not going to happen. So we need to prioritize. But to prioritize, we need to understand what value means for us here. That's our definition of value, right? So, well, yeah, actually, the value is kind of inverse here, right? The value is avoiding the risk, right? The risk of the penalties from non-compliance, right? So they formed a small group. Well, they understood what are the ones with a higher risk. But see, the risk here was the ones that could cause the most negative impact, right? And the ones most probable to happen, right? Starting from the deadline. And not just that, right? But maybe it was not entire procedures. Maybe it was part of procedures. Maybe it was special cases of procedures. And what happened is, yes, they reached the deadline and not everything was done. But the most critical ones were completed by the deadline. They prioritized accordingly, right? And they even realized that the first round of updates already mitigated the majority of the risks. And of course, when they reached the date, it's not that they stopped working, right? They continued working. But you see, when they hit the deadline and not everything was done, the remaining ones were the ones with a lower possible impact, negative impact, right? And with a lower probability to happen. Why? Because they prioritize it according to that, right? And no severe penalties ever happened. Another interesting case here with two different scenarios as well. Let's imagine that see this company that operates with a whole bunch of manual processes, and they decide they want to automate them all. Let's automate them. And then again, the question, how should we prioritize that? Well, in this first scenario, this company, they were responsible for assessing the applications in paper, right, for governmental benefits, for ride benefits, right? And the process was manual, so they would just get the papers, analyze, separate, whatever, right, down to the point where they would say approved, and what is the value for the benefit, or not approved. But when we start inquiring, why do we want to automate this? Because that's the real question here, right? See, automation is not a problem. The automation of manual work is a solution to a problem. So what is the problem behind this? In this case, their core problem was that the manual work generates too many errors. And errors in these circumstances are really bad, right? Well, they generate people receiving benefits that they shouldn't be entitled to, benefits that people are entitled to, but they have no access to it, wrong values, lawsuits, all kinds of bad things, right? And looking into the process, they realized that more than 50% of the errors came from one single step. So it's not exactly our Pareto, right? I don't care about the numbers, right? It would be 80, right? But in one step, there was a lot concentrated. It was the manual calculations that they did, right? Of course, we could get it together with a few more steps, and then that would get to more than 50, but 50 is a lot. So with the definition of our goal, or of value, if you call it this way, being minimal errors in processes, so that's our desired state, right? Well, we should start from where the errors are most concentrated. Let's automate just that step. And that could be done in a few weeks of work. Right? A project that could take a year, right, in a few weeks, by automating this step, the calculations, well, and delivering that, right, the rest would be still manual. So they would get the papers, classify, whatever. When they reach the manual part, input the data, verify it, of course, right? Let the computer do the work, get the results, follow with the manual process, and okay, approved, disapproved, whatever, right? But see, this might sound strange, but if you think about it, if you think business, right? Well, with this simple work, probably more than half of the expected business value of this would be delivered within a few weeks, right? Half of the errors came from there, right? So after this, half of the errors that would be generated, not anymore, right? And of course, after that, continue incrementally. What is the next step that generates more errors? And maybe after a while, errors are not the main problem to solve. Maybe it's the, I don't know, the speed of the response or something like that. Maybe you have to balance different things. This is simplified, of course, right? But see, we need an alignment around what value means for us. That will be clear in this next case here. They still wanted, they also wanted automation, right? But the thing here from this company was an actual client. They believed they had expensive people spending too much time on manual work, and they wanted to redirect their efforts to more noble tasks. That's how they said that. All right. And well, in this case, we have a completely different definition of what value means for us. Right? I could say the desired state is higher return on employee compensation or something like that. And that drives our prioritization efforts to a totally different path. Right? So if that's our driver of prioritization, we should start from where, the parts of the processes that would take more time of the most expensive people. Let's imagine one sprint of automating that. So we're not taking a process end to end or a whole bunch of processes and working through each step. No, what are the steps or parts that take a lot of time from the most expensive people? Automate that. By the end of that first sprint, a lot of value would have been generated, right? By which I mean we would free a lot of time of the most expensive people. And then maybe the next increment is what are the parts of the process that would take more, or the next parts of the process that would take more time of the most expensive people or the next most expensive people, and so on. Okay, so you see, both are about automation. Two different definitions of what value means for us, definitions of value, lead to two very different prioritization choices. So and this is a pattern. I like to identify patterns, right? There is a transition. We're getting from something old to something new gradually. In that case, in both cases, actually, right? We are talking about a manual process becoming automated little by little, right? In the first case, it was about procedures, software procedures being updated and evolving, right, and changing. It could be from going to an old version of a big software, right, instead of creating a whole new software, right, for months, and then replacing the old with the new, which is really risky. We do this transition. So little by little, we're transforming into something new. One of my first projects with Scrum in the mid-2000s, it was about that, right? It was for a big oil company in Brazil. They had an outdated technology, outdated product in their intranet for environmental licensing. And we transformed, I could say, a product that was, at that point, a big failure into a huge success by taking this approach, right? Because we prioritized according to what value meant to their key users. And gradually, we evolved the old one into a new one. We had to build temporary structures, two different technologies living together, simplify the design so the new and the old could look similar, and then changing it all. Yeah, we had to do a lot of things, right? But this was the best, the safest approach that led to success. And this is a well-known pattern, actually. Marty Fowler once named it the strangler fig. Not sure I love the analogy, but it's like the strangler fig tree that grows from other trees, and it kills the original tree, right? It's like the new replacing the old. Another pattern that I could talk about with some theoretical insight to start with. So incremental development, or as I'm calling it, a value-led incremental development, is simply the agile way of developing products, right? I'm just kind of distilling it, right? And in the end of the day, that's the same. So we're using Pareto prioritization, right? What is the core of the core of the core of our problem being solved, and then the next most important part, and then the next most important part, right? And we are developing and delivering it increment after increment from that core, from what is the most important according to that definition of value, right, to the outside. I never thought Scrum, with the Scrum Guide, provided a very good definition of what an increment is. So I'm giving my shot here. And I'm saying it's a small usable set of product additions or changes aimed at increasing value, implemented over a short period of time. Well, maybe we can use that. It's not an official definition. We can use that, right? But the point here is that each increment, and in Scrum we have an increment. Well, we used to have an increment as the result of a sprint, but now we can create increments throughout the sprint on the latest edition of the Scrum Guide since 2020, right? So for me, an increment is a safe small step of value. Why is that? Because on each step, we are converging to something done, something that works, something of visible and usable value, right? That can be delivered. It's a deliverable. It doesn't have to be delivered at that point, right? But we are converging. We're not flying in the space, right? With, something that at some point in the future will converge. No, right? We are converging very frequently. And then the decision of when to deliver is in our hands, right? And that's what Scrum's about, right? The iterative and incremental nature of Scrum is about that, right? That's one of the biggest powers that Scrum brings. And then this is my statement. From simple to simple, we can build the complex, but only the sufficient and necessary. By which I mean each small step, each increment, right, needs to be in itself simple. It gradually, incrementally, right, adds complexity to our product, right? And how far we go in that complexity, which means how well enough, how much is enough for the problem to be well solved, it's our decision as a product owner. It's very different from creating a large plan, right, where we are already predefining a lot of complexity, all this upfront complexity, that will generate a product that a good portion of it will never be used. It creates a lot of waste. Right? Here, well, we're not creating that waste. We're creating the waste that is part of any empirical method. After all, we are getting feedback, validating if that's the path, if that's the way, we should go this or that, right? But we are only adding to the product the level of complexity that is needed, that is enough for solving the problem. So this is a simulated example, but if we imagine a travel bookstore, we have the tendency of taking all of the user steps, right, for a user flow, right, and then implementing one after the other, after the other, after the other, right? So let's imagine that we define that for that travel bookstore, our most important user, maybe a persona, right, is the adventure traveler, just as an example. And if we take that persona's perspective on the definition of value, right, it could be, again, it's a desired state, purchasing books that inspire adventurous trips. Just an example, right? So instead of taking each step, let's imagine what are the most important problems that we need to solve so that our user can be purchasing books that inspire adventurous trips, right? And I'm not choosing what's going to be out. I'm just choosing what's going to be first. So in that case, the core problems here are to be able to find the book, right? And to be able to complete the purchase, which I could call checkout, right? So that's our start. So what are the necessary steps? Well, maybe a good solution for finding can be searching. It could be something else. It could be a simple gallery with just a number of books. It's context specific, and we have to make choices, right? So I chose search, right? And for checkout, well, payment, right? But we can slice it even smaller. we can imagine a much thinner increment. So for our adventure traveler, what is the most important way of finding a book and paying for a book? So maybe it could be search by destination and paying with PayPal, right? With those two, we are only those two. Let's start with them, right? That might be our first increment. It's our core increment, right? Like a minimal core solution for, our travel bookstore. We start with that. I know this is very simple. Maybe we don't want to deliver that. Maybe it could, right? Because our most important user would be purchasing a book, the most important way for them. So there might be value. But understand if you say, let's not deliver that. Fine, that's okay. But understand this. From this point on, which is maybe a couple of days of work, maybe even less, right? Whatever we add, whatever we increment, at each step, at each point, we can decide when to deliver. While if we would do the search first with all the, 30 fields in 3 tabs, and then seeing book description, and then, when can we deliver that? Too late, too risky, right? And we might say, yeah, but we don't even have a shopping cart. Yeah, shopping cart is for purchasing more than one book at a time, right? Fine, maybe it's the next increment right after paying with PayPal. Because first we ensure that we can buy a book at a time and we don't deliver it, right? But then as we converge there, well, let's add the next increment, which is a rudiment of the shopping cart. Maybe another way of searching. Maybe a little bit of the description. Maybe, oops, we've hit the end of the sprint. Fine, it's okay. We've had the deliverable from very soon. So this is pure risk management, folks. So this pattern is an end-to-end user flow where we are we're starting with I'm calling it a minimal core solution, the first increment, right? And from that point on, it's for us to choose when to deliver. Another one. So think about this product where we have suppliers and final customers. It doesn't matter what it sells, right? But let's say that at this moment, we are validating the product with the final customers. So we are not even sure if we should develop this product, right? We have something done, right? We're starting with it, right? And the thing is, we already have a handful of suppliers. So what should we build? So I'm not sure. I mean, I believe that most people here don't know what a wicked problem is and have never seen this book before. Look for this book, folks. This book is in the roots of agility. It's from 1990. The term wicked problems come from maybe a decade and a half before. I'm not sure, right? It's a term that has been used in the seminal article for design thinking, for example, which we can see here from Richard Buchanan, right? But what's important about this book and wicked problems? Well, first of all, the authors are talking about software development, which we can expand to all sorts of knowledge work, right? But it all started with software, so let's talk about software, right? And they are telling us that software development is not the usual or the normal kind of problem where we can describe the problem entirely and then search for solutions. They're saying software development is a wicked problem. And the wicked problem is a kind of problem that cannot be fully described before we offer solutions to it. Or maybe in other words, every time we offer a solution to a wicked problem, the problem redefines itself. Crazy, right? Oh, one quick example of that. Let's say you created a whole new set of features, not huge, something, right, for your key users, and you give it to them, and they start using it. What can we be sure that it's going to happen? Will they just, use it and find everything's okay, that's exactly what we needed, or behave the exact way you imagine? No, probably not, right? As they look into it, as they start to try to get value out of it, they might say something like, now that I see this working, this shouldn't be like that. I don't know what that is. Oh, now I see that I need this. Or at least they will behave in a total different way from what you expected. That's because this is a wicked problem. And that means we cannot know beforehand what we have to develop in our product, what the features are, what the product should be. We must have clarity on what the problems are that we need to solve. And we must start with good hypotheses. But everything is a hypothesis. So if you read the Scrum guide, you will see it says that Scrum is based on empiricism and on Lean as well. But anyway, empiricism, that's what it is, right? We're using an empirical method, validating and invalidating hypotheses, from hypothesis to hypothesis. So we cannot predefine beforehand everything, not even a lot, not even much of what the product will be. Because whatever we define will be a hypothesis. And how do you like your hypothesis? Like this or like this? Well, if it is like this, once invalidated, you are just generating a whole bunch of waste, which might be what happened in that project you participated, where you spent months working with your team, and in the end, well, nobody used it, or it didn't generate the necessary, the desired value, or maybe it wasn't even delivered. Huge hypothesis being invalidated, right? Anyway, this is the roots of agility. One of the creators of Scrum mentions this book in the early papers of Scrum. It talks a little bit about an idea of the use of something called Scrum in that book. So just to wake your curiosity, you may find about this. But anyway, the important definition here is that we are dealing with wicked problems. We need to use an empirical method. We need to be validating and invalidating hypotheses, right? What we shouldn't be doing is big planning upfront, big design upfront. BDUF, that's the name of that, right? We shouldn't be doing that, because this is just a huge hypothesis that may get invalidated, at least partially. It will generate a lot of waste. So BDUF leads to waste, right? And also to miss the deadlines, right? Because you need all the entire plan with the sequence of tasks, right? Everywhere to converge at that particular date. While with Scrum, with Agile in general, we're pretty much obsessed on converging into deliverables, right? That's the incremental approach. That's what happens at least at the minimum, sprint after sprint. But I'm defending here that maybe that should happen even in a smaller scale. I mean, even in the middle of the sprint, right? Those are the increments we're developing. We're converging to something deliverable. So we're not hitting whatever date we have in the future with nothing to deliver. We should have delivered many times before that. Well, then, I mean, there is a lot of uncertainty here, right? We don't know how our final customers will behave in this case. We don't know if they will want that product, and however we are offering that. So in this case, instead of creating the whole interface for adding the suppliers, editing them, whatever else is part of the suppliers, that's not important right now. We're testing this side here, the final customer side, right? So why don't we just, add the data to the database or hard code it, right? And once it gets validated, if it's invalidated, just trash it. You didn't waste too much time, right? Once it gets validated, right, then we need to replace that poor solution, right, with something more solid, of course, right? But we start with a simpler solution, right? And then when it's time, right, we don't leave that debt behind, right? We replace it, we evolve it. Another case that leads to a simpler solution. This is interesting because that's a story that I could iterate with the client on how it could have been. So I know I have here how it was, and I have how it could have been. So this case, we're talking about law firms spending a lot of time sending interns to multiple courts to retrieve legal process documents in paper, right? Imagine every day having to do that. What are the relevant papers? Let's get them. And that led to a lot of problems, right? You can imagine. And there was this governmental agency that wanted to modernize this. And at first, they planned to scan all of the documents, right? And then create a complete solution for making them available, searchable, generating reports, alerting of changes, commenting. You can imagine, this, huge amount of requirements and, how long it can take to deliver such a thing. Well, they spent a lot of time scanning, right? They spent a lot of time developing the thing, and other things happened in that path. Leadership changes, political interference. So we could say, oh, they got unlucky. They had bad luck. Yes, that's true. But my main point here is the longer it takes for us to deliver value, well, even worse if we don't have even a visible value, right? Maybe we have it, we don't deliver it, but people see it working. But the longer we are just in the middle of the thing, we have nothing visible, right? And again, we hadn't delivered anything, right? The more we are prone to other problems to emerge. I mean, we have a promise of value there. We have no real value. We have a promise of something working, but a percentage in a bar or in a Gantt chart, that's not real value. That's not real progress, right? So it's very easy for someone to pull the plug, right? Or to push the stop button, right? In this case, 5 years passed before they could deliver it and have it working. But, well, awful, right? I ran a simulation with them, and they came up with a solution for that, right? An alternative, how it could have been. So that's not the reality, okay? So why don't we get together with the law firms, understand what the most important, some criteria for defining what the most important documents are, maybe the open cases of a specific kind, right? We scan them, we OCR them, right? We index them, right? And then just a portion, right? And how much time you're gonna spend? Well, you can do that in a prioritized manner continuously, right? And make them available immediately. But the important thing here as well was to create a very simple web service where, I mean, they was just send the process ID, later keywords, but just the process ID to start with, right? And retrieve all the related documents. From there, gradually, they could add other stuff. Not only new documents that would get scanned, but alerts, tracking, uploads of new documents, comments, whatever. So in just a few weeks, they could have delivered a lot of value. But they waited 5 years, and they opened room for a lot of bad things to happen in the way, right? If they had this concrete working in the hands of users, people using, law firms using, right, evolving, it's much harder for any external interference to stop the work. This is another simpler solution, right? We're talking about, create something really simple, scan, select, right? It's a different way of seeing it, but yeah, that's what it is. So that's our pattern. Something that will create, that will evolve, but from a very simple standpoint, something that we don't want it to be this way, right? Or to be replaced. One more. So imagine this online store and the process of internationalization. So they deal with the tax system of their country. They know it well, right? But if they want to expand to the world, they have to deal with tax systems of a whole number of different countries, apart from the language, right? But, you know, and apart from the currencies, the tax systems are the real problem here, right? So how can they handle that? How can we prioritize this? So the point here is there is a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot to be learned here, right? If we aim for a universal system from the beginning, we'll spend a lot of time researching, planning, mapping, understanding, working, and even so, I mean, we will have problems. Even so, we will let go. I mean, we will forget a lot of cases. And we are waiting too much time to get to the real thing. So one possible pattern here, instead of just creating this whole generic system that will take care of every case, but will take a very long time and still will be risky. Instead of that, well, maybe we should look at the markets we want to expand to. And, well, which ones have the highest potential? Oh, let's say we want to increase profit, right? That's a very common definition of value, right? We're increasing profit from new markets. Okay, so which one has the biggest potential? Let's select this one to start with, just the first one. And for this one, which is our second, right? We have our base, and now the second one, well, let's create something specific. Let's not generalize yet, right? But see, we will have the learnings from our base and from the second market. Maybe at this point, we can think about generalizing. Or maybe we'll tackle a third market, and we'll have this one, two different ones. We'll see the differences. By putting our hands on it, we'll start to see what's tricky, what are things that we need to be careful about, different models, right? And then at this point, it's much safer to make something much more generic. So that's what we call 1, 2, N. So we start with one, we do a second, maybe a third, fine, right? And then that's the point where we should be generalizing, not from the beginning. That's the pattern. And here I have a final one, which is another interesting story. So this company, they had a legacy kind of ERP, right? Homemade, really old, really bad, but they relied on it. I mean, most of their data was on it, but it was really, really hard to get something useful out of it in terms of reports. So they say, okay, let's create a new reporting system. But the data is there. We cannot simply extract, and it's being updated there. So how can we do this? Maybe we could just create a new reporting module inside that system. But no, let's not do that. We don't want to keep feeding the monster. At some point, we'll have to kill the monster, replace it with something else. So they decided to create a new reporting system, but that reporting system would dynamically extract data from the legacy system, right? We'll send a request, get the data, and issue the report. That way, we would have to do minimal development on the old system, and most of the things would be new, right? So feed the monster just a little bit, right? But just the minimum necessary. And with a clear interface, they could later replace this with something else. So how could we prioritize this work? Well, we could imagine maybe we create a layer on the legacy ERP for exporting the data, right? That's maybe the first thing. Together with that, we define the format for exporting. So here's a an XML file, right, with the whole structure, taking a long time for defining that structure that will hold all possible data, right? And then the new reporting module that, you know, would be able to request the old system, get the data, fill their data structures, right? And then at this moment, months later, they could prioritize which reports will go first, right? The most important, the next most important. Well, folks, this sequential way of doing, and after a long time, we'll get some results, right? And then it's prioritized. No, that's not a good approach. So first of all, we have to understand, why do we want reports, right? What are reports for? Well, it could, as a part of the definition of value, have to do with compliance or something like that, but their core problem was related to decision making. Reports offer us information for better decision making. Okay, so if that's the case, what is the question that we need to ask? Well, what is the most important decision that we need to make out of this, or to improve? Because we maybe already make this decision, we just want to improve it, right? What is that decision? Then, well, what is the data that is strictly needed for making the decision, right? And maybe our first report, well, we'll just have a tiny bit developed on the old legacy ERP, just enough to export that data, right? And then the part of the file defined for exporting that data, very small, and a rudiment of the reporting module with the, you know, just the data structure for that data, and exporting a very simple, stupid simple report, right, with that data. And even that might be too big, so we may have to ask ourselves, okay, what is the most valuable or most common case of that decision, right? Or what can we assume as static on that decision? Still, we're making a much better decision. Or maybe we could have even less data, and because less data we deliver earlier, right? Maybe the first sprint we already deliver some data that will improve the decision. It's better than what we're doing before. And then incrementally, what is the next data for the next most important decision, or to improve that next important decision? And again, and again, and again. That's the incremental nature of that. Okay? So this is a transversal cut, right? For those who know the analogy of the slices versus the layers, which is a traditional analogy from 𝗪𝗹𝗹𝗀𝗀 from long ago, right? Well, that transversal cut would be our slice, right? It's kind of inverted, right? But that's what it is.